Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dominic Diorio, and I am president of the National Collegiate Choral Organization. As the professional organization dedicated to serving choral conductors and educators at the tertiary level, we thank you for joining us for our second season of webinars, Collegiate Choral Programs in an Era of Upheaval. This series responds to the current crises in our world with actionable steps, pedagogical resources, and community engagement while providing the very best for our students. For more information about the organization, please visit ncco-usa.org. I'd like to introduce you to your moderator for today's webinar, who will tell you more about today's topic and the assembled panel. Please welcome Miguel Felipe, our president-elect of NCCO.
Thank you, Dominic, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar, entitled Expanding Choral Pedagogies, is the result of the just yesterday released report from our task force, Expanding Choral Pedagogies. We'll talk more about that soon. Now, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists. We have with us today what we're calling a sort of a lead panelist. And a lead panelist is, in this case, Dr. Elise Hepworth. And Dr. Elise Hepworth is on the faculty at Missouri Western State University. We also have on today's panel Dr. Andy Clark. Andy is living and calling us in from Massachusetts, where he's on the faculty at Harvard University. We also have Dr. Rollo Dilworth, Rollo, just a bit south in Philadelphia at Temple University. Then we have Dr. Coreen Duffy. Dr. Duffy is in Montana at the University of Montana. You have me, of course, coming from Tucson, Arizona at the University of Arizona, and Dr. Patrick Freer coming to us from Atlanta and Georgia State University. Before we begin, we're going to talk a little bit about the flow of today's event. What's going to happen is that we are going to have a kind of an introduction to what it is that this task force is, why it was called into being, and what they've produced. Then we're going to go through kind of the expanding topics that come to the fore with this, the kind of expanding philosophies and delivery methods, and then content of the report. At any point, you, the attendee, are welcome to send your questions into us through the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. And so now, putting on my executive board hat, I want to explain why the task force was formed in the first place. It goes back to May, when the board quickly realized that the COVID and social distancing factor were not fleeting. It wasn't just kind of a few weeks during the spring semester, and that it would indeed continue into the fall. And it hit us that there's a whole discipline here, the idea of large music making at a distance that doesn't exist. And we needed to create this discipline, research, data, kind of journal articles, best practices, examples, audio, video, all the media that goes along with it, the sorts of things that would help us as practitioners to do our very best in constructing large ensemble experiences at a distance. And so we put out a membership poll in May, the executive board did, in which we said, what are the topics that you need help with, and can any of you help? We structured a charge from that for a committee, a task force rather, of very fixed length, to get together and to kind of address what it appeared to be the primary interests of our membership. And that task force was staffed with those who had expressed the interest and had the background we thought to be kind of exemplars of what would go forward to become best practices. The group was called into being in late May 2020, and June 1st they began meeting, and by June 15th the body of the report had taken shape and it went into editing, and now as of today in early August it's been issued in publication. The form of the report, of course, it begins, as you may see on the website, with a substantial kind of initial report, and then probably 2/3 of the paper in final form are in the form of appendices. The appendices, you don't have all of them yet, but they're listed on the website, and they contain a whole lot of information. The the report's appendices are kind of where the the pedagogies are explained, and where a lot of the resources are offered to our members. So I'll just go really quickly through what the appendices are. The first is a discussion of a mechanism for faculty to exchange information and help each other connect, to talk about topics that are maybe beyond our first experience. So that's a contact resource. Appendix 2A and B are the full bodies of data that came from a major survey we'll talk about. So those are huge. Appendix 3A, B, C are full of a bunch of examples, kind of sample syllabi, sample instructions for a virtual choir, sample proposals for a hybrid class or rehearsal, kind of examples of what people in the field are doing and how they're structuring their arguments or their proposals. So you have that resource. And then finally, Appendix 4 is the most complicated. It's a compendium of kind of best examples of resources, websites, tools, apps, and resources for you, faculty. So those appendices will be coming out in coming days as the final details are kind of signed off on. So I'm going to turn first to stop talking and get the panel involved, to Dr. Elise Hepworth, the chair of the task force, whose awesome responsibility was to guide this process and put it together. Elise, can you talk to us a bit about what it was like to call into being this task force on a discipline that's never existed, people, some of whom you've never met, and lead forth and produce this spectacular result? How has that been for you?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so very much for this opportunity, this invitation. We recognize that in the panelists here today, as well as the task force, recognizes that we are not experts in this area. We are trying to proactively react to a situation that has been handed to us with very little preparation. We realized that given this task force was kind of developed in the middle of many other responses that other national organizations were conducting at the same time, and we're very grateful to our colleagues of ACDA and the Professional Choral Collective and Cora Moore for the fine and incredible body of work that they've been able to produce. But we were thinking in kind of in the middle of this process, how can we best complement our fine colleagues' work rather than just create another duplication that might have a little bit more focus toward tertiary ed. So in our task force, we created 3 separate subgroups, thinking that we can speak to the opportunity of reshaping our philosophy or enhancing our philosophy during this time. We can speak to the actual delivery of courses, whether it be choral ensembles or face-to-face lecture courses, and then also thinking from a perspective that we could then solicit information from our students and from our colleagues as a way to help inform the report that we have then formulated, and then what you have seen this evening or last night, with this morning probably. So it was a interesting, innovative space to live in. I know that I fundamentally believe a rising tide lifts all ships, and we are the very tide that can lift all of our colleagues, our students, the choral community up in this opportunity as we've been presented.
So Rollo, we talked when we met before, just to prepare, about kind of the difficulty of going forth to find best practices when we didn't know what the practices were, and to study what pandemic does to music making, you know, like everyone else has already studied. You're going out into the darkness and shedding light. What's that process been like, and where have you felt qualified, and where have you kind of grasped for ideas?
Sure. Thank you, Miguel. I think what's most important to remember, as Elise mentioned a few moments ago, is that we all try to approach this from sort of a servant kind of perspective, in that we really wanted to do the best that we could to pool together a lot of information and to distill it into a document that we hope would be helpful and serve the field. I think for me, and maybe for my colleagues as well, we didn't know exactly where we would end up in terms of trying to figure out what would be some of the most important issues that we would have to address in this document, given that we have sort of the intersection of COVID and social justice coming to the fore at this particular point in time. So what we tried to do very humbly is to make sure that the information that is included in the report provides some perspective, but is not necessarily prescriptive, and that there are opportunities for, I think, every choral leader at the tertiary level to look very carefully and think more critically about their own work, and hopefully we'll be able to look at some of what we consider to be some of the most important principles affecting our field at this point in time, and take the information that we put together that will hopefully be applicable. Each choral leader can apply to their own particular situation.
Yeah, and so everyone, in the middle wee hours of the morning, Elise and I, we've been on Zoom a lot, working on PDFs and things to get the stuff to you. So 32 pages were released. It's a big chunk of writing. That's all original writing brought to you by Elise and then her task force. What is now going to come out in small pieces in the next couple of days as we make final adjustments is the resources. They're all in the appendices. And by the end, the number of pages will probably triple. And these pages are full of sample instructions for virtual choirs, or lists of links to websites and instructions on how to tweak the preference panel for Zoom and things like that. So we hope that's really helpful. In and amongst all those resources, I know that the task force chose to execute a survey just to kind of get some groundwork information out there on these new topics. Andy, could you tell me a bit about why survey? What was the survey process like?
Sure thing. First, I want to say too just how grateful and honored I am to be in dialogue with everybody today. Yeah, the survey idea actually came forth from a member of the task force, my new friend, Dr. Betsy Cook-Weber from the University of Houston. We were having a conversation about how we could supplement and build upon some of the great work that other service organizations have put forth, as well as, I'm sure for many of the folks here, a lot of the ideas and information, approaches to ingenuity in our pedagogy and practice that, for me, were filling up like an infinite number of tabs in my web browsers, right? We're just treading water in this ocean of information and possibility, but really needing, sort of craving some data from both our peers and our students. And so the survey of our colleagues is really has two purposes. It's certainly rooted in sharing best practices, most especially with those colleagues of ours teaching at institutions that we might call peer institutions, schools and programs similar to our own, so that we know as we travel this journey together, we can be in communication and in solidarity with our friends along the way. And I think we also wanted to gather some data for the sake of advocacy as it comes time to approach maybe our administrators or colleagues. Just knowing what other folks were doing at other institutions, we felt like would be a helpful tool. So as that data becomes available to everyone, we hope that folks can access it for both of those purposes. And another sort of opportunity we saw is that although, as Elise said earlier, none of us has any expertise in how to teach online or in a hybrid mode during a pandemic. We're trying to acquire expertise. We're trying to build some best practices. We do come at this with our own expertise as professionals who had some experience and training in our field, but also thinking about what kind of expertise could our students bring to the conversation and to our sort of formulation of how we can move forward.
And it didn't seem, at least to us at the time, that anyone was actually asking the students what they need. I know for me, you know, again, inundated with ideas and possibilities. We could try it this way, we could try it this way, but I had no idea where my students were. How are they absorbing the trauma of the situation, the extent of their feelings of isolation, and their feelings of both hope and appreciation in this moment as well. And how could we as a field, how could we as teachers and artists meet the students where they are and formulate our plans with the expertise that they can provide. So we think that that's a pretty unique contribution that this report makes. And I know certainly for me, my own planning has been enriched and profoundly informed by the students, while also trying to keep to our own values and keep to our own priorities as pedagogues.
Yeah, I know. Doing the editing and the final layout, I have now 30 or 40 tabs open. And I've got to go back, and adaptive leadership is just consuming me. And I'm absolutely compelled by the collecting you've done. Folks, so you'll want to, you can already begin to dig into these resources if you go to the report. It's online. Everyone who registered before 10 a.m. Pacific, or within an hour or more of today's webinar, I sent you an email directly with the link to the report right there in your inbox. So go ahead and download it. It's really a remarkable collection already of information.